St. Patrick made use of the shamrock as an illustration to help the people of Ireland understand this symbol of what God is like. In the Christian life, there are many such symbols. The cross, probably the most important. However, there is one symbol that has come to represent much of American life that you will never see representing the Christian life, and that is this. You see a lot of cross pendants and fish pendants. You will never see a recliner pendant representing the Christian life, because this doesn't represent the Christian life. God's not about making us comfortable or happy. He is about making us like Jesus. He has lots of ways of doing that. But there are some things he does not do to us. Do you remember the Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue? Dad knew he was going to take off. Knew he was not going to be around to guide this son. So he gave him this horrible name, Sue. And Dad's intent was to make this boy get tough enough to make it in the world or die. It was his way of contributing to his son's growing up. Not the best way to help your son, to help anyone make their way in the world. Actually, a good surgeon does much, much better than that. Those of you who understand how frightening surgery can be, any procedure for that matter, and when you sit down with the person who's involved and they explain to you what to expect, and as they're conscientious of your fears, answer your questions, let you know that they have the kind of skill and ability that's going to help you. Much better way to prepare someone for what's coming. Jesus, on the night that we're looking at in the upper room, was more like that surgeon. He wanted to prepare these 11 men for what will conceivably be the worst 60 hours of their lives. He wants to get them ready for it. And all throughout this, what's called the upper room discourse, these words he's sharing with them, all throughout there he said, I'm saying these things to you so that, and he has a number of different reasons that he's telling them these things. In chapters 13 and 14, Jesus said, I'm telling you about the horrible things that are about to happen so that you will believe. I'm telling you about it ahead of time so that you understand. These are not just tragic events. These are part of my Father's plan. So don't give up. In 15, he says, I've told you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full. The next 60 hours are not going to be very pleasant, but my joy comes to you in spite of all the circumstances. And then at the end of this talk he's having with them, I have told you all this so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. I like the way Eugene Peterson's The Message says this on the next slide. I've told you all this so that trusting me, you will be unshakable and assured, deeply at peace. In this godless world, you will continue to experience difficulties. Anybody been there? But take heart, I have conquered the world. He told them these things so that they could get through not only the next 60 hours still trusting him, but through the rest of their lives, still trusting him. The key to all this is in the passage we read today. Remain, abide. Remain in me, abide in me. What does that look like? When we are living our lives in Jesus, we're no longer just people who go to church, believe in God, try to be good, and hope we'll get to heaven someday. We are like branches on a vine. Those branches get all their nourishment, everything they need from that vine. And the point of the branches is not to look pretty. The point of the branches is to bear fruit. The only way they can do that is to draw what they need from their source. The Bible says that we're also to be bearing fruit. What does that mean? We're not to be looking at other people and asking, I don't like the way they're doing that. The point of bearing fruit, it's not so much the good things you do. The point of bearing fruit is the character you exhibit. As we said before, this year at this time, you should look more like Jesus than you did last year at this time. Nothing to do with the outward appearance, but your character. Are you more loving this year than you were last year? Are you more joyful? Are you more patient? Are you kinder? Are you more gentle? What Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. It's the result of the Holy Spirit at work in us, and we get what we need to be that way with this process of abiding. What does that look like? Jesus used this image of a vine because how many of you grow strawberries or you've dealt with strawberries before? They will send out what are called suckers, little vines, little branches. They wind up doing nothing, just sitting there and taking up all the nourishment, but they don't produce strawberries. So people who raise them pinch them off. Same thing is true in grapevines. Last summer, Janice and I, with Lindsay and Sam, visited my cousin in Virginia, and he works in a vineyard. Gave us a tour, showed us, and we got to see this stuff that Jesus talks about. These little shoots that come up. They're not really the full branches, they're just little things. And if you let them go, oh, they're so cute. And they grow, and they're taking nourishment from the vine, and maybe a leaf or two will pop out, but they're not bearing any fruit. And what's happening is those sucker vines take all the nourishment out of the vine that should be going to the branches that are bearing fruit. And so they got to come off. How could you be so cruel? How could you be so heartless? They're just sweet little sucker vines. They're not going to hurt anybody. But that's exactly the point. They're not doing anything except taking up nourishment that needs to go to the branches that will bear fruit. So we know the fruit is Jesus' character. What are the sucker vines in your life that are drawing away what you need to become more like Jesus? It's going to be different for each of us. Some things we have in common. The way the Lord eliminates those sucker vines in your life is by bringing some very difficult and painful experiences to bear. Pinching off. Sometimes we don't recognize it as God pinching off. We just feel like something bad has happened. Walmart on a Saturday night when there were only 5 lanes open. And everyone in Lebanon County has done their grocery shopping that night. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm never doing this again. I'll find some other time to go. Wait, I can't. This is the only time I can go grocery shopping. Why do I have to stand? Why can't they have more lines open? And you're grousing and complaining. And at some point, the Lord said, you have a struggle with patience, don't you? This is where you learn. And whether the problem is the fact that you're dealing with something in your life that you know shouldn't be there, or whether the problem is your very life is hanging in the balance, Father has purpose that doesn't seem apparent, but He's pinching off the sucker vines because His purpose is not to make you comfortable. His purpose is to make you like Jesus. What does abiding in Jesus look like? Let me give you 2 illustrations and then we'll be done. One is what abiding does not look like. A writer named Brent Curtis wrote this. As a Christian, if I'm not abiding in Jesus, then where is it that I am abiding? I once asked myself that question. I began to notice that when I was tired or anxious, there were certain sentences I would say in my head that would lead me to a familiar place. The journey to this place would often start with me walking around disturbed, feeling as if there was something deep inside I needed to put into words but couldn't quite say it. I felt the something as anxiety, loneliness, a need to connect with someone. And if no connection came, I would start saying things like, life really stinks. Why is everything always so hard? It's never going to change. And if no one noticed that I was struggling or asked me what was wrong, I found my sentences shifting to a more cynical level, saying to myself, who cares? Life is a joke. Surprisingly, by the time I was saying those last sentences, I was feeling better. The anxiety was greatly diminished. My comforter, my abiding place was cynicism and rebellion. From this abiding place of cynicism and rebellion, I would feel free to use what I call soul cocaine. Maybe watching a violent video with just a bit of sexual titillation thrown in. Maybe having more alcohol with a meal than I might normally drink. Things that would allow me to feel better for a little while. I always thought of them as just bad habits. I began to see that they were much more. They were spiritual abiding places that were my comforters in a very spiritual way. It was not a good place to be. The final light went on one evening when I read John 5:17 in the Message. Eugene Peterson translates Jesus' words on abiding in this way. If you make yourself at home with me, and my words are at home in you, you can be sure that whatever you ask will be listened to and acted upon. Jesus was saying, in answer to my question, if I'm not abiding in Jesus, where else am I abiding? Jesus answered, I have made my home in you, Brent, but you still have other comforters that you go to. You must learn to make your home in me. Last illustration has to do with feeling like Jesus has moved in. Have you ever had the privilege or burden of having someone come to live with you for a while? Hopefully, when they come in, you set some ground rules. These are things that we need you to do and things we need you not to do. You don't really intend that when they come in, they'll take over. Start redecorating, starting moving furniture, actually talking about making an addition and eliminating this wall. No. This is my house. You have the privilege of staying here. My house, my rules. That's how we normally think of it. When Jesus moves in, he doesn't move in as someone who is subject to our rules. He's coming in expressly for the purpose of making some changes. And sometimes they're not very comfortable. For example, imagine this. You come home from work one day and Jesus is there in this home that you've invited him into, and he's looking through a photo album. Pictures of your memories. And you look over his shoulder and you're remembering some of the things that he's looking at, times that were fun. And then he stops at this one page. And he says, you didn't know it, but when you weren't looking, I saw you looking at these memories, and you stopped at this one, and you lingered at this one. This one hurts a lot. And then he turns a few more, and he comes to this one picture, this one memory. It's the time that you fell into temptation so hard, and your memory keeps going back to that because it was a pleasurable time, but you know it was wrong. It has become a kind of mental abiding place for you when things are stressful, and you go to that memory of something that was wrong and you gave in. And Jesus said, you spend a lot of time with this memory, don't you? Here's what I want you to do. These two memories, these two pictures, I want you to give them to me. He will never grab them out of your book. Give them to me. I'm going to take them and lock them in this box. I have the only key. And every time you want to go revisit that memory, you come to me, and we'll open it up, and we'll look at it together. And when we do it together, this memory will lose its power over you. It'll no longer bring you the kind of agonizing grief it used to. And the other one, the pleasant memory that's not a good place for you to abide, it'll lose its power to comfort you because I'm here. Abide. Pray with me.